Hello and welcome to Polyplane.com. Today we're going to be talking about a tool that I'm surprised I actually haven't brought up earlier, and it's actually a pretty common tool within 3D programs, and it's called piping. Piping can be considered a distant cousin of sweeps. It primarily uses a circle as its cross-section, and it can be used on curves and edges that follow a single direction and have a pretty good point structure, and we'll get to the point structure thing in a second. I have 5 different items on my screen here. I have a cylinder, which was an extrusion, which is essentially what a pipe is. It's a cylinder, but the cool thing about pipes is you can sweep them around multiple different axes and the curve will stay perpendicular to your line. You'll end up with an object that has a circular profile but follows multiple different paths. So for instance, if I type pipe in Rhino and I select on my curve, and it's going to ask me for a radius, so we'll just do 0.125. You can see what happens. It created a circle and it swept it across the curve and left me with this piped object. Likewise, you can do this in 2 axes as well, where I can take my object, type pipe again, hit enter, and the curve will follow around the corners and create the piped object. Likewise, you can also do this in 3 different axes. So we've got my X, my Y, and my Z axis. So I'll select my curve, and this is a closed curve, type pipe, and it'll pipe all the way around the object. So you can see what it's doing. It's creating pipes around objects. Now, the cool thing about it is you can also select different diameters. So if I type pipe and I have my start radius and then my end radius, and then it's going to ask me for different points on the curve where I want to have slightly different radii, I can then just go in here and start making random changes to the curve. It's going to change the diameter of the pipe depending on where I selected those points and how far I dragged out from the center. Now you can do this arbitrarily, or you can specify specific dimension. So you can wind up with some kind of funky looking organic shapes pretty quickly by doing it that way. This could be some cool exhaust for a ship or whatever. Now the other thing I want to talk about is the quality of where your points are placed on your curve. So I'm going to invert everything, hide it, and just take a look at this curve for a second. So if I turn on the points for this curve, we can see it's all pretty good. You've got 3 points that dictate where the radius is happening. You have a start point, and then you have a few midpoints here that tell you where the midpoint of your curve is between the 2 points before the radius. But what happens if I take one of these points and I decide to move it too close to the edge? And you can see there's a little line that came up here based on that new information that I give it. If I escape out of that and type pipe, what's going to happen is the computer is going to try to figure out what happens at that blend, and what's going to happen is your pipe's going to break. In this case, it actually flipped the normals to complete the pipe. That's why it looks almost like it's kind of invisible on that section, because that's where the problem was. If I take this pipe and I explode it, you can actually break down where the issue is. Now clearly you can see what happened was it didn't know how to trim coming from this surface to this surface. So if you're going to want to use the pipe command, make sure your curves are built as cleanly as possible. Now the way to avoid this is so I moved the middle point over. Say you needed to make this shape from scratch, what I would do is actually just use the polyline and rough out your shape using your object snaps. Okay, so there's your shape, and then take that and fillet it until you get this shape. That way your midpoints, if I turn this on right now, it's not going to have any midpoints. If I fillet the corners and join that all back together and then turn on the control points, you can see my midpoints are now there, and they're right exactly where they need to be. If I move them too far in any direction, that's when you're going to start to get the wrinkles. That's the pipe command in a nutshell. Now there's one other thing I wanted to show you, and that's I've got this form factor here, which is, just a random organic shape. But the cool thing about it is the iso lines that create the form, these edges actually are all good curves to use for pipes. So let's say I want to detail out this form a little bit and give it some sort of seam line looking things. I can actually type pipe and then select edges of poly surfaces, and you can get nice little detail lines to show up on the surface that follow the contours of whatever your master form is, because they're using the same iso curves. So there's one other thing that we can talk about, and that's the ends. So there's an option in Rhino where if you type pipe, and we'll do 0.125. There, up here at the top, it says cap flat. You can actually select that and make it round. And then when you come through here, it'll actually make it more of a pill form. So it kind of fillets the edge of that pipe. Typically when I'm working, I keep mine flat, because what I'll do is I'll come back and fill at the edge later, it gives you a little bit more control over what you're modeling. So I'd come in here and change my radius to like 0.030 on something this small, and you can see it kind of gives it a nice soft rollover. The other cool thing about pipes is that you can actually pipe multiple things at once. So I was going through here showing you one at a time all these things, but if I select 2 items and I type pipe, I can actually just specify my radius, and then it'll go ahead and pipe both of those things at once. So that's a little bit of a time saver. So that is the pipe tool. Most every 3D modeling software has some sort of pipe command. Sometimes it's called tube, or I believe in some programs it's called snake. I could be wrong on that one. But it's a really great way to quickly add details, especially in this circumstance where you're creating little surface bumps and that sort of thing. So hopefully you can come up with some really neat ways to use it. I always use it for like wire forms, for like wire baskets and that sort of thing. It's pretty good for that. So, all right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.